Hey, everybody, welcome back. It is the Razzball Fantasy Baseball Podcast. I am Beadon, joined, of course, by the Fantasy Master Lothario himself, Gray Albright. How you doing over there, Gray?
I just farted. Did you hear it? It's embarrassing.
I
It's so
don't think the mic picked
embarrassing.
it up. Maybe if we crank
Well,
up the volume.
oh, it's so embarrassing that I mentioned it then. I wish I wouldn't have mentioned it.
It's okay. I'll go back and I'll just pump that volume up so everybody else hears it. And they'll
Yeah,
be like, oh, Beadon's like deaf. He can't
yeah,
hear anything.
yeah. Do that for me, please. Add in a fart. So this way at least it sounds like I'm doing something that, rather than just making up stuff.
How
Uh,
you doing, Gray? I mean, our last stab run of the year is
besides
over.
besides having gas, I'm good, man. You know what? I'm feeling pretty good. I get a little depressed around this time because it's the end of the season, and I'm like obviously a baseball addict. I have a problem. I'll be honest. At least I have baseball. No, but yeah, I don't know. It's a weird feeling because it's like I'm excited about having extra time to myself, but on the other hand, I do like enjoy baseball and fantasy baseball specifically. Like it's weird. I don't know if like because I like some people are like, "Oh, it's similar to like how teachers have the summer off, like but you have the winter off." And it's like, "Yeah, kinda, but I feel like teachers don't necessarily like going to work." I do, and I do. I don't know though. Maybe that's not true. Maybe I'm misspeaking for teachers, and maybe they love what they do, even though I don't think they do. I got the sense when I was in school that they didn't love being there, but maybe it was just my teachers. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I'm happy. I'm happy the season's over in some ways. In other ways, it's kind of sad. I'm I'm excited to see the playoffs. Actually, the playoffs are fun because it's like the one time a year I can watch baseball and not be like, why is Travis D or no not hitting? Or like some random guy. Because I'm invested in like every player across every team. So it's like finally I can watch a game and not worry about like a middle reliever giving up a random 3 runs or something.
Yeah, you just get to be a fan again for a brief second. You
Yeah.
just fall back into it and enjoy the playoffs. Yeah, I mean it's always nice to actually just stop the analysis side because really the playoffs are its own thing anyways. No, nothing really carries over. So yeah, I mean it's a great period of time. Hopefully everybody out there is finishing up their finished up and won their titles, or you're chasing it down these last 3 days. Let's talk about it's something we talked about last week, Gray. How and I don't even there's so many conversations. Maybe we talked about it somewhere else, but we talked about like first rounders really should have steals because like that's how they balance so much of value when we're talking about fantasy right now. Like you can have a terrible average, but if you have 30 steals, like that makes you a top 30 player somehow. But we also look at the top four finishers on the player rater, and they really aren't stolen base threats. Now, Judge has 20 or 16 on the season. Goldschmidt has 7. Freeman has 13, which kind of comes out of nowhere. And Alonso has 5. So they're not complete goose eggs. I wouldn't expect like Judge to be over 10 ever again. Same with Freeman. Like and like I don't feel like any of those four are projected next year for more than 10. But is there something to some of like these guys that we're talking about, those top four not being stolen base threats, but still ending up there? What are we thinking in regards to how you approach rankings as we start looking towards next season?
Well, you're saying a few things there.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Because yeah, I agree that they're not like stolen base threats, quote unquote, but they are guys who have given steals this year. Alonzo less so, but like you already mentioned, Freeman, Judge, and Goldie did give steals, and Goldie and Freeman at first base. Those steals are making a bit of a difference. Like Freeman, especially, like on the player rater, he has 4 points in 4 point shares in steals. So essentially, he's giving 4 points in steals out of his near 38 points, or dollars, I guess, $38. So he's giving $4 worth of steals, to put this in more terms people understand rather than point shares. I think, and then you have like Aaron Judge, who has like $5 in steals value. Obviously not as valuable in steals as he is in other categories, but still, I mean, none of these guys are negatives. Like, you have to go down to Yordan Alvarez, who's at 11 overall on the player rater, who actually has a negative on steals. Alonso only has a 50 cents in value on steals, but I mean, that is still a positive. So, yeah, I mean, Yordan Alvarez is the first one down at 11. So, if Yordan Alvarez were to have, the same number of steals as like a Freeman, then it would have been like, $5 extra, which is like, propels him up to around the 6th spot on the player rater. So he goes from 11 to like 6 or 7, between 6 and 7. So, yeah, I mean, so you can see that there is value in steals. I mean, obviously there's going to be like guys who have, like, if you look at like across the board, if you look at guys who have like, say, I don't know anyone who actually has this. I'm looking, I don't even see, not even Jose Ramirez. But if you were to take someone who has like, say, $7 in steals, homers, runs, RBIs, and average, I mean, then they'd be a $35 player, and they would only have $7 in each category, and that's not like elite by any stretch of the imagination. Like, seven, as you said, 7 with Freddie Freeman, he had like around $7 worth of steals, and he only had 13. So if you have a guy who's like giving around, roughly $7 per thing, that's close to a top 5 player overall, and he wouldn't be elite in any category. So, yeah, I mean, steals really do matter. If you can make up for it, like an Aaron Judge or a Goldschmidt, like if you can make it up for it in a different category, then, awesome. But like Pete Alonso had to get 131 RBIs to make up for only having 5 steals. If he would have had like, 20 less RBIs, but 5 more steals, he'd be in exactly the same spot. So it's like, 5 steals and 20 RBIs are roughly around the same in value. But yeah, I still think steals are so important. Like, I hear what you're saying. Like, none of those guys, the top 4, are really steals guys per se, but they all gave some steals except for Alonso to get them into those like really elite top echelon area of the player rater. And you have other guys who are not really elite in any way, like in any category, like an Adolis Garcia. Like, I love Adolis Garcia, don't get me wrong, but he's not elite in any category, yet he's a top 15 overall player just because he's giving so many steals. It's like, that really makes a huge difference.
Yeah. So I agree with what you said. Like the getting 7 to 10, the 13 stolen bases Freddie Freeman has, like being a non-zero in the stolen base category certainly helps. Just, it was just kind of a thought as we move forward, because also with these guys, these really aren't the guys that were going early first round. Aaron Judge was a second or third round player. Paul Goldschmidt was later. Freeman was second or third. Alonso was second or third. So we got like the second and third rounders because, again, they're not necessarily a projectable steals, but they landed in some, and they have all the numbers along with it. They all have high average. They have the RBIs, the power to go with it, obviously. So I just think it's about building the roster. So as we start talking about, who we have ranked higher, that's probably starting next week and then moving off, obviously, through the offseason. But it also depends on how your league's going to draft and how you're building your team. So it's just something to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, completely. Yeah, I mean, if you have, if you have a guy like Trey Turner and I don't know, say Adolis Garcia, and then say I don't know Randy Rosarena, then you have so many steals. Then it's like, yeah, okay, so it makes sense to take a guy like Mike Trout or something. Like it's still about your team build. Like it doesn't matter if a guy is like crazy in steals and like if you don't need steals, it doesn't matter if a guy is getting some steals. Like it's irrelevant. Then like Rafael Devers is totally fine for a team that doesn't need steals, but it's still like steals are valuable. It's just a matter of whether or not you need them, kind of.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's talk about let's start putting some of the numbers together. Let's take a look at kind of the top 12, 13 finishers on the player radar. They're all hitters, but it's Aaron Judge, Paul Goldschmidt, Freddie Freeman, Pete Alonso, who we just talked about, Trey Turner, Jose Ramirez, Manny Machado, Mookie Betts, Dansby Swanson, Francisco Lindor, Yordan Alvarez, and Kyle Tucker. I did this research Sunday night, so that's the numbers that I have. Maybe it's changed by now, but if we're just kind of looking at those 12 guys that I listed there, Gray, who is likely to be ranked the lowest of that group? Who are you buying the 2022 season the least?
Well, I buy into Dansby Swanson, but he's definitely going to be the lowest, I think. Just knowing how people draft, and I just don't see him being anywhere near some of these other names that you mentioned. Like Dansby Swanson is like you said, I mean, he's like he's real close to Trey Turner in the player rater, but like there's no way that they're going to be anywhere near that close in drafts. So like what would I do necessarily or like ADP wise, I think Dansby Swanson's going to be pretty low out of those names. I the other guys like I think are pretty close to Alonso's gonna fall in ADP and probably in my rankings. He's not gonna be that high. I like Alonso too. I'm a fan. I just don't think he's gonna be like right now he's top 5 overall. Or top 4 even, but he's not going to be anywhere near that when we get around to rankings. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think those guys are going to fall the most. Probably, I could see Lindor falling a little, Machado falling a little, not a ton, not as much as maybe last year, but he's going to fall a little bit. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Probably Swanson and Alonso will fall the most.
Okay. I can see from the ADP perspective that, Swanson probably doesn't go up there with these names just because he's Dansby Swanson. Also, he's a free agent. So there's the fact that he's going to be changing teams potentially. I don't know if he is or not. The Braves are pretty stacked, so they could definitely move on from him if they wanted to. But assuming he just kind of lands back where he is, I don't really have a problem with Dansby Swanson. I said coming into this year, I thought he's just a cheaper Lindor. Like they're right next to each other on the player radar. That's kind of how it ended up. And if I'm worried about one, assuming again, same landing area, like I'm probably a little bit more worried about Lindor than I am Dansby. And I would say of this group, I'm probably the most worried about Freddie Freeman just because 13 stolen bases is very random for him. He didn't have the power this year. The average was there. I kind of expect him to be somebody who can maintain at least the average for a little while. But we've also seen with, first base types, great hitters, historic hitters, even like that could be a quick drop off. They can go from, 30 home run, 40 home run, 300 guys to 20 home run to 60 guys in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, looking at like Freeman's career numbers, where the hell did the steals come from?
That's why I said he's like not a stolen base guy.
No, I get it. I mean, he did steal though. That's all I'm saying. I think we're both right.
Yeah.
He is not a stolen base threat, but he did steal bases. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think you're wrong. I think Freeman was, I want to say, I don't know, it's not in front of me right now, but I want to say Freeman was around 12 overall last year. I can't imagine he's much lower than that, though. And Swanson and Alonso aren't going to be in the top 12. I mean, they're
No.
just not. Not as much as you might like them, they're not going to be in the top 12. I mean, I like Swanson a lot. I was probably one of the biggest Swanson fans. I was a fanson, but I still don't think he's going to be anywhere near that. Like probably, maybe top 25, but I don't even see. I don't even know necessarily if we're going to see top 20 from Dansby Swanson. And like you said, it will depend a bit on where he lands and if he goes back to Atlanta. I wouldn't be surprised if they move on because they have Grisham, so it's like they don't really need him. But yeah, we'll save that for another day. But yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I'll be interested in seeing. My guess would be Swanson's going to be the lowest. Alonso's going to be near somewhere back end of the top 20, and then Freeman's going to be around 12 to 15 again. I honestly don't see Freeman moving much from his ADP last year.
Okay, so I mean, it sounds like I'm going to own a lot of Alonso, not a lot of Freeman. Pretty much how it came into this season, and then I think the other one is Goldschmidt. I know he's just kept on doing it, but he's going to be 35. The ageist in me. I mean, he's 35. He can't keep doing it, can he, Gray?
No, I don't think so. I don't. I was actually surprised he was able to do it this year. I wasn't like officially out on him this year where I was like, really like pounding a drum to avoid him. But I also was kind of like not drafting him either, which turned out to be the wrong move, obviously. I wish I would have drafted him this year, but I didn't draft him anywhere. I was real lukewarm on him. I think it was kind of like my strategy was more like get a top first baseman and, and I considered like I got Alonso in a few leagues. Like I like Alonso a lot and I drafted him this year. Like I had Matt Olson more places than I want to even talk about. I had, I had quite a few first basemen like going in the top that were like Vlad Guerrero Jr. I had guys that I felt fine with, and honestly, at the end of the day, like a Matt Olson wasn't terrible. I mean, he wasn't obviously as good as a Goldie, but I mean, he's still going to end up in the top 60 overall, and I think he was getting drafted at like, I want to say between 30 and 40. So, I mean, a little bit down, but not really. I mean, that's not a huge problem. It's obviously not great compared to Goldschmidt, but no one saw this season coming. Like, even people who were drafting Goldschmidt, they weren't seeing this. They were expecting, the 30 homer, 7 steal, 300 average. They got they got a near triple crown season from him, which they were not. No one was expecting this.
Right. So I mean, Goldschmidt's probably the only other one in this conversation that I'm potentially not going to own next year, but the rest of them look great.
He's actually decent. I wonder where he goes next year because you are fair in saying that Goldschmidt's going to fall too. I don't know who's going to go. I think Goldschmidt or Swanson. I mean, you're not wrong. Goldschmidt's going to come down a little bit from this spot for sure. He's not going to get drafted in the top 5, that's for sure. I don't know. Will he go in the top 20, 25 maybe? Maybe he does fall more than Swanson. I don't know. It's tough to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend. It always depends on the draft a little bit when you start talking about some of these guys that are up there in age because some people really like the established track record and they feel like they count on it. Some people go, he's 35, it's not going to last, like myself. And so it kind of depends who's in your room as well. Let's talk about some. Oh, go ahead.
I also like, because I was going to say, like, Goldschmidt, like, the first base is still, like, I mean, it's not quite as stacked as it once was, but it's still pretty stacked where you could see people being like, okay, I could go Goldschmidt at 20 Or I could take Nathaniel Lowe at 75, 85, and and what's really is it that big of a difference? And people can convince themselves of a lot of things with first base. Like they could be, or actually any position, but first baseman feels like especially like, well, is he that different than Ty France, who I'm getting around 130 overall? I don't know. Like, well, yeah, he's a little bit different. I mean, he's done it for like 10 years straight. And Ty France hasn't done it once, but it's kind of different.
Yeah, so I mean, it just goes back to the build and what you feel comfortable with.
Right. Yeah.
And we'll dig into it. Obviously, it's October. We haven't done full rankings or looked at all the numbers on all these guys quite yet, but we also know what we've been looking at all season. Let's talk about some of the top arms, Gray. In that top 12 on the play rater is Verlander, Sandy Alcantara, Julio Urias, Alec Manoah, Shohei Ohtani, Dylan Cease, Yu Darvish, Carlos Rodon, Zach Gallen, Corbin Burns, Shane McClanahan, and Tony Gonsolin. Other than Gonsolin, I feel like that's the obvious one that doesn't come back into this group. So I'm going to put Fried and Cole, who are 13 and 14 in this discussion, instead of Gonsolin. Who is the most likely to fall out of this group, Gray? Who's the one that you're probably not going to own, or that you think falls the furthest in drafts?
Uh, well, there's a good chance I don't own a lot of these guys. I mean, just the way just the way I draft. I mean, I can't imagine like Justin Verlander. Like I would guess he goes in the top like 3 to 4. I mean, I would assume. I mean, I wouldn't draft him there. I'm just saying. I guess like others will probably draft him like in that area. I mean, Ohtani obviously he's hooked up. He's going to be in the top. He's going to be a top 3 pick because he's connected with hitting. So it's not fair to even say Ohtani because I mean it's like Ohtani I would draft if I have a top 3 pick. But if you don't have a top 3 pick, he's not even going to be on the board, so it's going to be irrelevant. There's like this. I don't know. This is weird because I feel like with Yu Darvish, I was so out on Yu Darvish coming into this year because last year was so bad, and then he rebounded really well. That I don't know. I mean I would kind of have to look at his numbers, but like there's also Sandy Alcantara that I feel like there's no way I'm getting him. Julio Urias, I always seem to be out on because he doesn't strike out guys, so I'm kind of out on him probably. I don't know. Corbin Burns kind of depends on where he's going in drafts. I mean, so it's similar to like, I mean, a lot of these guys I like, and I would actually draft them if they're going at a decent price, but I don't know where they're going to be going. So it's kind of hard to say. I don't think like you said Gosling is definitely going to be out, and I agree. I don't think he's going to be drafted like he's going to be a top 10 guy. So there's a chance I could even have Gosling. I mean, it's possible because if he's going late enough, I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily dislike Gosling. I was telling people to draft him this year, and I don't know. I mean, he definitely his K per 9 isn't beautiful, so there's some worry with Gosling. Maybe there's a little bit of concern there, but I'm probably not drafting him. But it's like not necessarily because of how high he's this year. It's just where he's going next year more. So I don't know. I feel like it's going to be a process to look at all the starters and sort of come away with like guys in an area where I feel like I could really draft. Like for instance, like there's a good chance like someone like Christian Javier, who you didn't even mention, who isn't even he's not in the top 15, but he could be like my number 1 starter next year. Like I could see going like Christian Javier, Nestor Cortez, and like I don't know, Spencer Strider say. It's like it's a lot of work is gonna have to go into the starter rankings. So I don't want to say that's exactly how it's gonna be, but there's definitely something to like like the top 15 to 30 starters this year could house like all of the top 10 starters next year. Like, because if you look at these guys, like Verlander, like everyone likes Sandy Alcantara, but no one thought he was going to be a top 2 starter. Verlander, everyone was out on because he's come back from Tommy John surgery. Urias, people were worried about the K per 9. Alec Manoah was a guy who I drafted everywhere at like starter number 25 overall. Ohtani, we know Ohtani's deal with hitting. Dylan Cease, I wrote a sleeper post on. I was legitimately out on Darvish and Rodon. But, and Corbin Burns was like the number 1 starter off the board, and he's the 10th starter now. So it's like there's so much alchemy in the starters that is not just straight. It's just so, I mean, it's fun. Like Shane McClanahan, I wrote a sleeper post on him too, and it looked like he could have been the Cy Young until like he fell off a bit in September, and then he had the injury or whatever. But yeah, I mean, there's so many starters that you can draft later that like who I'm gonna be out on in the top 10 starters. It's like I could be out on all of them, to be honest. I mean, it's very likely I don't own one single top 10 starter from next year. Like, I mean, it depends kind of like Zach Gallen, maybe if he's getting drafted later. Alec Manoah, I like a lot, but if he's getting drafted in like the top 30, I'm out. I don't know if he will be. I'm just saying if he is, then it's like, oh, well, I'm not drafting him, So, yeah, I don't know. It's a long way of saying I don't know. Anyway.
All right, Gray. I guess so. I'm gonna make you pick one name. If you have to talk one name here, I'm going to. I'm just gonna make you do it because that's what the people want. They're not gonna let you. They're just gonna say I'm a yes man if I don't make you say one name here, like one name that's gonna be ranked lower that you expect to be ranked lower on than general consensus next year, out of this group.
Okay, then I'll say Yu Darvish. I think is probably a safe one to say, even though I mean I haven't even looked at his numbers, to be honest. I mean, I could be totally all about Yu Darvish next year, but I'm gonna say just Yu Darvish because I was so out on him that I'm surprised that he came back this well. But yeah, I mean I don't know. It's like Sandy Alcantara. I mean, I could say him for like 100% sure I'm going to be out on him, but that's only because he's going to get drafted so high. Like, it's like silly. I saw someone say, I forget where it was, but someone said something like, oh, the Marlins shut down Sandy Alcantara right before, the regression hit. And it's kind of, I mean, it's true. It's like, you could say like all next year, 2023, people will be, oh, well, Sandy Alcantara, is going to regress. And he just may never regress. Like, it could be like the Julio Urias situation where they're just able to pitch above like what their xFIP and their K per 9 is able to do. That doesn't mean necessarily that I'll be drafting them. I 100% will be out on any starter that is going in the top 25, or actually the top 50 probably, or 45, say, like the top like 3 rounds. Any starter that's going to the top 3 rounds, I'm going to be out on 100%. And I think Sandy Alcantara is going to be a name that's going to be in the top 3 rounds. So I'm probably out on Sandy Alcantara, but I mean, that isn't because I necessarily dislike him. I just won't be drafting a pitcher there.
Yeah, that's the name I'm probably going with as well, just because it is a lot of innings that you're counting on. He doesn't have a sparkling K rate. He's outperforming the numbers. He's in the right park to do that, but he's going to be overdrafted. There's going to be a lot of recency bias in him. So yeah, I assume that's probably the one that versus consensus I'm going to be down on because I love almost every other name in here. Verlander is going to be 40. That's a concern. I don't know when Darvish all of a sudden aged to like 37, but he's going to be 37 next year. So there's potential that I'm out on Darvish just because he has been just within his career. He's so inconsistent, like year to year. Even in his prime, it was a little inconsistent. Although I will say he had the highest fastball velocity he's had since like the first year he came over. So that is giving me a little hope that Darvish can continue.
Yeah, I was looking at Darvish's numbers while you were talking, and yeah, he doesn't look that bad, to be honest. His numbers don't look terrible. So like I said, I hadn't looked at his numbers before saying that I was going to be out on him. I may not be out on you, Darvish. He may be fine. Any pitchers though in like the top 45 overall, I definitely will be out on. And Sandy Alcantara feels pretty obvious to be in the top there. Like I mean, I'm trying to get a sense for who the top pitchers are going to be like next year. I would guess Justin Verlander, Sandy Alcantara, and Garrett Cole might
Burns.
still Burns. Yeah, I mean, I would guess those guys. I'm out on all of them, but I would guess that like I'm trying to right now I'm trying to guess on ADP, which is it's a little bit of fool's errand because I don't know how other people are going to be drafting, but I would assume like more like that's kind of the top four, and I'm out on all those guys for sure, 100%. People are still drafting Garrett Cole in the top four. I mean, honestly, I mean, no lie, if Jacob deGrom is pitching well in spring training, people might be drafting him in the top 15 overall. people do crazy things when it gets to draft season, and they're like, oh, if you take an ace as your first pitcher, you do better overall, or so that's why I'm drafting DeGrom, and it's like. And then you look at the numbers, and you're like, yeah, DeGrom hasn't thrown like more than 100 innings in like years. like he's not a top pitcher. Like he's a top pitcher for like 70 innings a year, which is fine. I mean, this isn't necessarily anything against DeGrom. I think he's amazing, but he can only throw like 70 innings a year. I mean, it's not, but I mean, people still did this. Like, I'm not making this up out of thin air. Like, people were drafting DeGrom this past draft season for like a second when he was pitching really well in spring training. I don't know if you remember this, but his ADP was like suddenly like in the top 15 overall, and people were taking him in the top 10 because it was like, oh, DeGrom is pitching well in spring training. Here comes that big DeGrom season because he's about to be a free agent, and it's like, what? None of this makes any sense, man. It never made sense, but people did it.
Yeah, the narrative fit too, because he was a free agent. He said he was gonna be a free agent. He wasn't gonna take the extra year, so it was like, oh well, he's betting on himself. The narrative was fully there with DeGrom, so I definitely remember that. I am gonna be a little sad that I don't get like the Cease, Rodon, Manoah, McClanahan's of the world cheaper, but they'll just be replaced with somebody else.
That's about DeGrom. If he's like, which I anticipate, because this year was so bad for him, I wouldn't be shocked if we see him go in drafts around where Justin Verlander went this year. I could see DeGrom being really worth people's while next year, like in drafts. If he does go at like 100 overall, like we saw with Verlander, I could see him being good. So yeah. It really a lot of this depends on the price. It doesn't really, it's like DeGrom is amazing. I just never really bought into the whole top 5 starter because he wasn't ever going to stay healthy. It wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will wait and see where he lands and what all that looks like. I mean, he could fall. I don't expect him to fall that far just because, I mean, Jacob deGrom has always looked like so damn good. Verlander had like that mini dip of like a year and a half where he looked kind of mortal.
Okay, but if you're going into the postseason and you're like, DeGrom didn't pitch well this past start, right? He goes in the postseason. He has a couple bad starts in the playoffs. People start getting cold feet, and it's like, he's always injured. He didn't even look that great towards the end of the year last year. You can see people starting to talk themselves into not drafting him, and then he falls into like the 7th round, and people are like, "Yeah, I'll take him in the 7th round." Yeah, bro, give me some.
Yeah.
Give it to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will see where he ends up. I expect myself to be shopping in like, I don't know, probably like the Strider, Nola, Woodruff, Wheeler group. If I'm just not looking at like where we're looking at the player rater right now,
You know, I still
that's probably where I'm landing.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. Same. But you know who's a guy who actually wasn't that bad this year, who I think got a bad rap, who I could be in on again is Aaron Nola. I think like Aaron Nola is someone who's like, you know, always gives a lot of innings. He's he's nearing 200 innings this year. I think he still pitches again this year, so he's going to go over 200 innings. He's really good for ratios. He's good for Ks. People don't respect him at all. Like for whatever reason, like, it's just like, oh yeah, Aaron Nola is someone who I'm able to get at like 55 overall in drafts, and it's like, yeah, I'll take it. Or also, I wouldn't be surprised if Brandon Woodruff falls next year, and it's like, yeah, like all those people that were crazy about Woodruff going into this year, and they're going to be out. Like, well, I'll get in. He's still good, Like people get really like people are. I don't know. I feel like their memory bank is just. It's not. It's like they get clouded. Like they get clouded by the shiny new toy thing, and they're like, oh, Dylan Cease, he's got to go in the top 25 overall, and it's like, what? What? I was drafting him last year, meaning this year. Like I was drafting Dylan Cease as a sleeper this year, and it was great. I loved it. But now he's suddenly a top 25 guy. And then they don't draft someone like a Brandon Woodruff, and it's like, well, wasn't he your top 25 guy last year? Like what? And that happens every year, invariably.
Yeah. I mean, if you just take Aaron Nola's numbers are amazing. Like he was great this year. We were both on him in draft season because I gave the stat in draft season, like how ridiculous his K per 9 versus what his ERA was. Like it just doesn't happen. His K per 9 and his K to walk. Like he had a great season. If he literally gets like 5 more wins rather than a 10 and 13, if he goes 5 and 13 or 15 and 10, like he is a top 10 guy on the player rater, and people are then he's in this discussion. But because he got his Cliff Lee season, like he's ranked below, or he's not ranked, but on the player rater, he's below like Nestor Cortez, who has less than 160 innings, doesn't have the Ks. Obviously the ERAs and WHIP is great, but like he just had the wins to get him up on the player rater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, completely, 100%, man. I absolutely agree. Yeah, like Aaron Nola. Hopefully, Aaron Nola's there for us at like 50 overall, because I will draft him in every single league next year.
That'd be beautiful.
Yeah,
beautiful.
it really would. Yeah, that's cha-ching.
All right, great. Let's talk about some fun stuff. Let's talk about some of the breakout bats. We've already talked about Michael Harris II, so we won't spend too much time on him. But also Julio Rodriguez, Adolis Garcia, Bobby Witt Jr., Vaughn Grissom. I mean, Corbin Carroll's also part of this. Like, there are so many fun young hitters that came up this year. Like, where are you at on these guys? I mean, I feel like J-Rod's going to be a first rounder next year for most people. Witt maybe in the second round with Harris. What are you thinking here? I mean, and Adolis, we both like, and we've talked about him a little bit throughout the whole season. Like,
yeah, no, definitely. Adolis, I don't even think Adolis is a breakout, to be honest. I think Adolis broke out last year, and people are just catching up now. Like I was, I wrote a sleeper post on Adolis Garcia at like the very end of like sleeper season, right? He was the last sleeper I dropped before rankings, because I remember too, because I was like, on Monday I'm going to drop my rankings, and I have one more sleeper to write. And it's going to come out on Friday before the Monday rankings. And I was looking around for like one more name, And because I like saved one spot because I knew like there would be someone who would be falling through the cracks who I wasn't sure who it was going to be, but I knew there'd be someone, and I was going to like, I was going to try and figure out who that was. And I remember the night before looking at ADP and being like, Adolis Garcia's going at 150? What? He was already broken out. He was good already. Like, he was good. Like, it was like, for whatever reason, and I think it goes back to like people get a little bit hung up on like the strike, like the not taking walks, the thing that really has screwed over Javi Baez. And I get it. I mean, I understand people's concern with a guy who doesn't take walks. The slumps can get real bad. I mean, I hear that, but also there's the speed power combo that Adolis Garcia brings that is just like you don't find that everywhere. And that's sort of the same as a similar situation with, and I think that goes to like possibly people just don't watch the Rangers, which I understand too, because they're a real boring team. Yeah, they're a terrible, boring team. They're a tough team to watch. I'll be honest. They're one of the, I love baseball, but the Rangers are really difficult to watch.
Adolis in the bullpen. That's it. Like that's the whole thing. We're watching.
Yeah, I mean Corey Seager and Marcus Semien, they picked up towards the middle of the season. I mean they ended up not being terrible, those two guys specifically, but they have a lot of holes in that lineup. Anyway, so I think like Adolis Garcia, like if you watch him, you're like, it's sort of like it's hard to miss how like powerful and how much speed he has. Like he has the tools. So, like he's like, and so now bringing it back to the other guys you mentioned, like Michael Harris II also is right there. Like it's hard to miss what Michael Harris II is able to do. Like when you're watching and Julio Rodriguez and Bobby Witt Jr. Like they're all so like they have speed and power, which is so valuable. It's going to be really hard to not be excited about just about all those guys. I think probably like J-Rod is probably like, I don't know. We'll do our top 25 next week. But Julio Rodriguez isn't going to fall very far. I mean,
one of us is grabbing him up quick.
Yeah, and Bobby Witt Jr. I love Bobby Witt Jr. too. I mean, I honestly don't think he's falling out of the top 20. So yeah, I mean, and Oneil Cruz is going to be another guy. Like, I don't want to show all my cards in October, but like Oneil Cruz, if you look at the moment, like he got his hitting coach this year, like he went out and he hired a hitting coach. It was a small little story in the Pittsburgh area about him hiring his own hitting coach. And from that moment on, like, it's like, you don't want to read too much into like silly narratives, but like he's hitting like 300. I think he hit like 300 in the month of September. So that was a guy who was like, everyone was like, oh, he can't hit 170. He's got no contact. And then he hits 300 in September, or close to it at least. And then, it's like, so him going into the postseason, the off season, I mean, Oneil Cruz, I think the hype is going to I think it's going to bring him up. And I don't think we're going to be able to steal Oneil Cruz for next year, but I'm hoping like hell that Oneil Cruz falls in drafts and I'm able to get him in a bunch of leagues, because I don't want to like overinflate. I don't want to go for him too early. He feels like a guy who there could be some helium and you might end up, he goes too early. So it's like, but Oneil Cruz is going to be special. I don't know if it's going to be next year, but at some point he's going to be really special. Like we're talking like 30-30, maybe only hit 245, 250, but still, I mean, he could go 30-30. Yeah, I don't know. The bigger question marks for me are the guys who didn't break out. The guys who are like the Ronald Acuna Juniors and the Tatis Juniors, like those guys are still around, man. It's like, where are they gonna go? Like those are the and like the Louis Roberts of the world, like, or Luis Robert, or however he says his name. I don't know. Lou Bob.
Yeah, so we will see where each of those guys goes next week as we draft our top 25. So come back for that one. But I mean, you're right. All these guys look great. Plus, there's Acuna, there's Tatis. I mean, it's not like Trey Turner went anywhere. Jose Ramirez, Manny Machado's been great for years. Mookie Betts is coming off like the best season he's had in a few.
Yeah. Oh, you actually mentioned a guy. So I don't know. Maybe you have some thoughts, because I was looking at Jose Ramirez's second half, and it's concerning. I don't know how you feel about it. I was like looking at him. I'm like, I could see I could see starting to backpedal on Jose Ramirez, because like while he does do everything right, and it's been going on like many seasons in a row now, I don't know, man. His second half really wasn't very good. Like it's a little concerning. I don't know. I'm not sure yet. I don't want to say 100% I'm out on Jose Ramirez for next year, but I don't love some of the trends.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely dropped a little bit in the second half. The average dropped. The K to walk dropped a little bit. I mean, he's still an elite player in that, but there's definitely some concerns. Hard hit dropped slightly. I'm going to say I'm probably not worried about Jose Ramirez. That being said, I feel like he's probably going to go as like a top 3 or 4 guy in most drafts. And at that price, I don't know that I'm necessarily getting him. But it was like the end of this year at draft season. He was kind of going in that area. And obviously, it was a worthwhile pick to take him in that area. He finished 6th on the player rater. But if he's going in that top 3 or 4 guys, I just don't know that I'm going to be the one that invests in him. I might go in a different direction.
Yeah. All right. I guess
so we will see, Gray. I mean, you kind of mentioned Luis Robert here. I kind of want to talk about him real quick. We got a few minutes before we need to wrap it up. Let's talk about him and Andrew Vaughn. I mean, it's the White Sox conundrum. Hopefully they move on from the manager situation next year and everybody can be better. But I mean, Andrew Vaughn had a good first half, hit 301, 10 home runs.
Tony Larussa retired.
Okay, so he's officially out.
Yeah,
are we looking positive next year on these guys finally? And I mean, we might as well.
He's out to I think he's out to 2 a.m. I think is closing time in Chicago area. Am I out on Louis Robert? I don't. You know what? He's going to be really difficult to call, because like his numbers. I mean, he's really, honestly, it's goofy how little he's played in his 3 years. Like, it's not just a 1-year thing. Like this year, like, I was making fun at the second half that he was like day to day for like 3 months, but I mean, he's kind of been like this for 3 years now. It hasn't just been just this year. Like last year, he had 68 games played. 2020 is a throwaway year, so you can't count that. But it's like 2 years now where he hasn't been able to stay on the field. I don't know. I think I'm in, because he's still so young. He'll be 25. He just turned 25. So yeah, so he's 25 years old for most of next year. He's got good speed and good power. I don't know. I mean, I think I'm in. I honestly, it kind of depends on where he's going to be going in drafts, but if I'm guessing correctly, I would assume he's going to be going like around maybe 75 overall. And if that's the case, yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard to not be in on him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a guy that can put up, 25 season with good numbers all around. I just feel like it's been a health concern thing. And as much as we like to think that we know anything about it, again, Verlander's number 1 pitcher on the player rater, and we were all concerned about Verlander coming in this year. So I think I'm probably with you. I'm probably back in on it.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, because like I think they're like, and I'm guilty of this as much as anyone, but I think sometimes there's just so much made of, like, players being able to be healthy, but it's like if a guy is healthy and he's great, then you kind of have to give him a pass. Like if you look at like Carlos Rodon, like, and I was guilty of this. Like I didn't want to have anything to do with him because I didn't think he was going to be healthy. But if he was going to be healthy, I knew he'd be good. So, it's kind of like what I was saying before about DeGrom, and it's like Rodon and Louis Robert. It's like if a guy is going to be healthy, and if he is healthy then that means he's going to be great. We might want to give him a little bit of a pass on whether or not he's going to be healthy, because we should just assume good health for the most part. If a guy is going later in drafts, like take the injury discount, I guess is what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think maybe as you're building your team, you don't necessarily do what I do in some leagues and did this year, where you build like a Mondesi, Eloy, Louis Robert.
Right, but you know what? On the other hand, right. That screwed you. You took it in the old rear on that one. Yeah, it hurt. But you know what though? Because you have other situations where it's like, okay, this is Gray in March. You know what? I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna be conservative and not take injury risks. So instead, I'm gonna take Jonathan India. Like you don't know who's gonna get healthy and who's gonna be injured. Sure, Eloy and Robert and Mondesi might have had more health concerns, but anyone can get injured. You didn't know Tyler O'Neill was gonna get injured. Like you didn't know Jonathan India was gonna miss months with stupid injuries. Like Tim Anderson, you didn't know these guys were gonna be out for so long. Like it's like, you can't predict it, so you may as well just assume good health.
Yeah. So just kind of a wrapping thought here. I just want to kind of talk about, like guys like Louis Robert, where especially when they're younger, like it can change. Like there's still time for him to get in the right habits, to adjust his way that he's playing. And maybe, he gets a little bit more DH time. They stick Eloy out there. It's not like the White Sox have a overly difficult outfield to play. So maybe that there's a little bit of resting time in between as we're going forward. But I think that's some of the value that we can look for if you're going to do some October, November, December drafts before we really get.
Yeah, Miguel, the White Sox manager, Miguel Cairo, has resting Louis Robert face. So it's good. We're in good shape then.
It's been a fun season, Gray. We got one more show, at least during the regular season related, I guess, kind of. Well, it's not. It's for next year. We're going to do the top 25 next week, and then we'll be back, periodically through the off season. If you have any questions for this last week, you can always send them to us, as we always have. If you are, wanting to make sure you get the off-season podcast, you don't want to miss next week, make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts. Or if you're watching it out on YouTube, youtube.com/razzballfantasy, subscribe. That way you get those notifications. And as we mentioned last week, we're putting the shows up on YouTube first. So if you go out to YouTube, you'll actually get them as soon as they're up, where otherwise the podcast comes out with the post on Razzball. So a little incentive to our YouTube watchers to go out there. Gray, best of luck as we have the last 3 days here. Hopefully you're taking down some titles.
All right, Lates.
See you, man.